Hello, nerds. I started filming this video and I went off on a whole rant about my experience interviewing, so I thought it would make sense to have one video about me explaining my interview experience last year and another video giving you all my tips and advice for all the stuff like recruiter calls, negotiations, interview prep. So I'm splitting this into two videos. Yeah, if you don't know me, my name is Maria and I used to make technology videos on the internet. Maybe I'm back because making videos is fun, it's creative. And anyways, I don't make money from doing this and I can't because I'm on a work visa. I don't have to do a video every week or something, but this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a while, and I know that people are interested in hearing like what was it like to do these interviews. Also, obviously, all the tips. So the tips will be in a separate video. Essentially, if you don't know anything about me, I was working at this company for like 2.5 years, and I've recently left. I started working there after I graduated university. I moved from Canada to San Francisco after a bunch of layoffs that they had and changing managers and teams. I really did not enjoy my time there. I really, really wanted to leave, but the problem was that I was very depressed from working there, so I didn't have the energy to kind of go into coding interviews. As you probably know, coding interviews are tough and it takes a lot of energy, like mental and physical energy, to get through them. I was just like, okay, I'll just work here until I reach 2 years. I'll get my second year stock vest and I'll get the fuck out. Luckily, that worked out and I stayed like almost 2.5 years. So back at the beginning of 2024, things started to get pretty bad after we had a second layoff. My experience at my company was becoming pretty bad. I kept complaining to my mom on the phone. I promised her that I would start interviewing in the summer. And once the summer came around, my mom yelled at me over the phone, being like, "Why are you still complaining to me? You should already be interviewing or preparing to interview." So I was like, fine. I'll do it, okay? I had some vacations planned in like June and July. During that time, I also started preparing for interviews. I started with a system design course, which is usually what people do at the end of their interview prep. But I was like, no, I will start with this. So as someone who's like mid-level going towards senior, I knew that knowing system design is pretty important at this point in my career. And luckily at my current job, or at my old job, where I was currently there in 2024, I had a lot of experience writing my own project specs, figuring out all the technologies to use, like, okay, we need an AWS SQS here, a step function here, this type of database. So I had that experience, but a lot of junior engineers don't really get that experience. So doing a course like this is super helpful, and it also filled in the gaps for me, different tools that I had never used or never heard of. When would you use this versus that? That was super helpful and I highly recommend doing that. Dimples is like eating the carpet right now. I don't know if you can hear her, but she's being a little monster like usual. So it took me like a whole month to do that course because it's a huge course. And then in July, I was like, okay, fine, I have to start actually coding and doing elite code. So I started with the cracking the coding interview patterns course, which I have recommended on this channel before, and I'll talk more about it in the other video. I went through it, but it's kind of boring doing it so many times in my life. I felt like I needed more practice, obviously. I know some people like leak coding, but I don't. And I was like, okay, I just want to do the bare minimum for me to get good at this. So I found out about the Grind 75, which is a list of a bunch of questions, 75 questions for coding interviews that are like the most popular questions that companies ask, statistically speaking. So I went through that. Each week you'll have a set of questions to do. So I would try to go through those. And for me, I set it to be like, okay, I have 8 weeks of time to go through all these questions. And in the end, I actually only went through the first 6 weeks because after that I had some offers and I decided to stop interviewing. My philosophy was like, okay, I will go through these. I'll start applying for jobs once I'm doing comfortably some leak code mediums. I can do some of those and I know the patterns. So I started with that. This was like July, right? So in August, I started applying for jobs and I used simplify.jobs to apply for jobs really quickly. So they have a Chrome extension that fills in your profile into every job app or most job applications. And they also have their own tracker. But I also had my own tracker on Notion, which I'll talk about in the other video. I was keeping track of the jobs I applied to, and my stats are that I applied to 60 jobs and I got 20 interviews. So not counting like CTO, CEO ones at startups. This is just coding interviews. So I had 20 coding interviews. I would say probably 10 of those were just me cold applying through Simplify or just through LinkedIn. The other maybe 10 was from recruiters reaching out to me. So I had a lot of those like inbound recruiters talking to me. Basically, my philosophy when applying to jobs at this point in time was that I will just apply to everything that I see because the best practice for interviews and getting good at coding interviews is to just do them. So I was applying to any job I saw. I did not care what it was. I just wanted practice. Like, I wasn't actually going to work there. That was my psychology, that was my thinking. I'm not going to work at these companies. I don't care about them, because I had a list of like 10 dream companies that I would love to work for. And I decided I will only apply to those once I have already had an offer at another company. That didn't end up happening, but I had this list of companies, so I did not apply to those yet. So in this time, I was interviewing at a bunch of companies, like big name, like Meta, whatever, TikTok, those ones, and then interviewing at a bunch of startups and smaller companies as well. It was pretty interesting because not every company is doing LeetCode and some are doing like their own thing. So it was pretty tough to actually interview this time around because you don't know what to expect. Also, during this whole time, I was still working a full-time job. So can you imagine, interviewing is already a full-time job. Preparing for interviewing is also super hard. Trying to keep up the facade that you are working on projects. And at this time, my manager gave me like 3 projects simultaneously. So I was struggling. In 1 week, I had 7 recruiter calls, which I would usually schedule in the mornings, 5 coding interviews at 5 different companies, and I had 2 manager calls to like do the behavioral interview. Some weeks were insane, and some weeks I would have to plan to take off because I was on call or something at work, so I couldn't do interviews. So it was actually like a stress-free week when I was on call at work. So that was like a funny thing. Some people asked me, did you put like in your work calendar that you're busy? I did a few times, but honestly, like, you can move most meetings, or you can just say, oh, I can't come, or make an excuse like, oh, I have an appointment, or something came up, or you take a sick day, Basically, I was doing all these coding interviews during September and the first week of October. So maybe like a month and a half was when I was doing coding interviews and on-sites. With those 20 different companies I started coding interviews with, 3 of them turned into on-sites. Not the best stat. But the issue with 2024, which I thought was not going to be the case because, I had done interviews before. You saw me do internship interviews, new grad interviews. So I was like, okay, I know how to interview. I just need to review data structures and that kind of stuff. But nope. Even when I would do coding interviews and I would get the questions right and I would still have like 10 or 15 minutes to ask the person for questions at the end, I would still get rejected for some reason. They had the most random reasons, and a lot of the times I would ask the recruiter, can you give me feedback? And the recruiters don't care. They don't give feedback. Still always make sure you ask for feedback just in case they will give you feedback. With those, it's like, okay, maybe I should have done this with the coding thing. And I would ask ChatGPT after the fact. I'm like, okay, here's the question that I had. How would you code it? And then I would see like, okay, maybe they wanted me to do this or that instead. It feels like right now, every company is looking for a unicorn, like the perfect software engineer, and they all have to be senior, which is very tough for someone who's trying to be like mid-level engineer or like on their way to senior and they're not senior yet. And all these people on YouTube are like, just get to senior already. And it's like, hello? How can you first of all get to senior when you can't get a job? Because most of my friends who are also in tech are struggling to get jobs too. And I even saw some guy post on LinkedIn who works at Google, and he was saying that it took him 6 months to get a new job. Like a senior engineer at Google, it took that long. So the market is tough and really messed up right now. So that's why I wanted to make these videos. I know a lot of friends who are also in like toxic workplaces and they want to get out. Friends who might have been laid off, or like they're just trying to find something new, It's really, really hard to get a job right now, so I get that. And I was very lucky, of course, to still have my job, but it made things a lot harder because a lot of my friends who did get laid off, they had the time to commit to interviewing. And honestly, I kind of wish I was laid off because a lot of the bad stuff happened after the layoffs to me. So I was like, maybe getting laid off wouldn't have been so bad. Every waking minute I had was for interview prep. Like I would wake up and study. Then I would do some work, do recruiter calls. Then I would have interviews. Then after work, I would be studying. And then I would just be reviewing stuff the night before. I'll be looking at Glassdoor reviews of the company or anything I could do for like the next interview the next day. And it was just like me running on a hamster wheel the entire time, just having no air to breathe, like running out of energy from all of this because I had to get rid of all my hobbies, like stop playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends on Wednesdays, stop focusing on learning languages. My health kind of took a hit because like you don't have so much time. You're just like scarf down some food in between interviews and then you're like running around it's crazy. It's a lot of work. So yeah, I'm very grateful to be out of it because for those 4 months that I was doing this, my life was hell. Like really, really hellish. So you know how I remember I said I had that list of all the companies I wanted to apply to. One of those companies, a recruiter reached out to me, and this was in September, and I was like, oh fuck, I am not ready for this. And I told them like, oh my gosh, I wanted to apply to your company, but can you give me a few weeks? So they were nice enough to give me that, like, to prepare. Once I had prepared everything, I did the interview. I was like, I don't know how I did so well in this interview. I like finished, like, had like 20 minutes left at the end of the interview to ask my interviewer questions, and it was just, I had so much fun in this interview. It was great, and they had positive feedback for me, and they were like, great, we're gonna move you on to the on-site round. And I was like, oh, on-site. And this would have been like my first on-site, and for my dream company too, and like a dream team, a dream role, everything. But then I didn't hear back from the recruiter, and then a few days later, and then a week later, and I'm like emailing the recruiter like, hey, what's up, like, why haven't we scheduled the on-site? He finally gets back to me and says, oh, actually, the team that you were interviewing for, they don't want a back-end engineer anymore. They're looking for a front-end engineer. So we'll find you another team to interview for. And then I kept emailing and heard nothing. Like, they completely ghosted me. That was just like so heartbreaking because I put so much energy into this job. This was my dream job. I was like so looking forward to it. It's something that I use every day, and I love this company. And to just get ghosted like that for no reason. Like, I did well in the interviews and everything, and then this just happened. Like, I don't know what's wrong with this recruiter, because my friend, she warned me about him actually. She had an internship job offer from this recruiter a few years ago. Then he just rescinded it and didn't give her any information. So she warned me about this guy, which I should have, taken this warning, maybe found a different recruiter to work with. And yeah, I was obviously heartbroken because it's like you're going through so many rejections. Like, I was doing so poorly in other interviews to finally do well and to get this like on-site thing. I was like, what the heck? Like, to be ghosted, that was crazy. Like, also there's so many ghost job postings, getting ghosted from so many recruiters, but I was like, okay, finally, I'm lucky. And then this happened, and it's just like, oh my gosh, why are people like this? But after that, I did get two on-sites. I interviewed at two different companies. One of them was for a back-end role, the other was for infrastructure, because I wasn't sure what I wanted. That's also one thing that you should think about when applying to jobs, is what are you optimizing for currently in your career? So for me, it was career progression. For other people, it might be work-life balance, pay, working from home, return to office, whatever you think is important to you. For me, I wanted to get promoted. I wanted to get to the next level. I was only applying to mid-level or senior job positions because I was like, I'm not a junior anymore. I can do this. It was funny because for the two on-sites that I did do, one of them, when I came in person, this is my first ever in-person on-site in my whole life. I came in person to them. I had to Uber there. I was so nervous. I'm like reading my notes on the way there because I don't have like sticky notes on my monitor. I can't do it. It was also funny because always recruiters would be calling me and asking me like, oh, are you okay with like 3 days RTO, 5 days RTO? And I'll be like, oh, fine, sure. I was just lying because I wanted like interview practice. I liked like the hybrid. I thought I liked the hybrid environment at my current job. But once I came in person, I saw how lively it was at this company. It reminded me so much of what it was like back when I worked at Shopify pre-COVID, when there were so many people in the office, people were having fun, people were playing ping pong, at lunch. I was just like, wow, maybe I do want RTO. Especially as a young person, this was something that I didn't think about. Like, your social life is really revolved around the work. It's pretty important to have an in-person office when you're young, at least. Maybe if you have kids, it's easier to have like work from home. Yeah, so I came in person for this on-site and I did the interviews, and it was really interesting because this company I had never thought about, like a lot of these companies I just applied to blindly. And it was also hilarious because on the outside of the room, on like the little tablet, it said Maria Sitkovets, senior back-end engineer interview. And I was like, fuck, what did I apply for? Because I did not think that they would like, I didn't know I applied for senior. I thought I was like mid-level or like number 2 or something, but that was hilarious. So I did those interviews, and they did like give me the back-end 2 role instead of senior because I have a little bit of ways to go to senior. That was pretty funny. That that I was like, huh? What? I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna fail these interviews. But I actually did pretty well on that. That happened. And then I was like, oh, interesting. Like, I learned about the company, and it was pretty cool. And then the other company I did the on-site for was more like also hybrid, similar to where I was currently working. It was infrastructure and all of that stuff. But it was very weird because during the interviews, I was talking to the manager and the people that work there, and they're like, yeah, this is an infrastructure team, but all these people, they're just software engineers. They're not like DevOps people, they didn't know infrastructure before they joined the company, so you can just learn it on the job. And I was like, oh, that's cool, but I do have infra experience. Half the stuff I do at my current job is infrastructure. Also, I did a 8-month internship doing infrastructure. I said all this, but then I was shocked because when I got the offer from this company, they tried to down level me and give me entry level for this role because they said I didn't have experience. And I was like, what? Hello? When this happened, I was in Japan and Korea. So I'm like 16 hours time difference from these recruiters, these companies. So I was doing calls at 6 a.m. Japan time or like 7 a.m. talking to these recruiters and being like, hey, like negotiating the offers and also trying to prove that I am not an entry level engineer for infrastructure. So finally I changed their minds and they gave me like the mid-level, like second level job. I mean, every company is different. Like the place I was working at was under Amazon, so it's very hard to get to that second level because it's technically a terminal role because they have like barely any levels. At these companies it might be easier a little bit because they might have more roles. I got down leveled at that role, but I was still considering it because the team was really cool. I really liked them. And basically once I had finished my 2 weeks trip, I came back and on that day I had like a meeting with my manager at my company and I didn't tell them anything about all of this stuff because that was the day that I was going to decide between the two offers. I didn't think I was going to end up in this space because remember, I only applied to random companies. I didn't care about these companies in theory, but I was so burnt out and tired, from interviewing. And I also ended up liking these companies because the more I learned about them, the more I actually liked them. I thought that both of these offers would be good. So it was kind of like what happened when I had a New Grad Diaries series on my channel where I had two offers and I had to choose. So in this case, the choice was between backend at one company, mid-level, or infrastructure at the other company, also mid-level. So I would be promoted in either case. I negotiated the salaries and everything, so that was good and I learned a lot about that, which I'll talk about in the other video. On the day that I came back, I talked to a bunch of people at that infra company. I talked to them on the team to get to know them. I learned that their whole team is spread across the US, so it kind of felt like I would just be changing my laptop. No one would be in office. Like I wouldn't see anybody. A few people who were in San Francisco, they are all on paternity leave, so no one would be there. None of my team would be there. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's too similar to what I'm currently having at my job, and I don't like that. And then the other company is all like super in person. You can work from home like once or twice a week. And I'm like, okay, that might be good. But it's a commute, so it's like 1 hour for me to get there right now. But I'm trying to move closer. Why did I choose this other company? Even though when I would call my friends or even my brother, I talked to them and I was like, oh, which company should I choose? What do you think? All of them would say like, oh, take this company, the one that gave you the infra offer. It's more well known. People like it. People know about it. And nobody knows this other company. Like, we don't know anything about it. My instinct and in my gut, I felt like I really wanted to work here because, being in person has actually scared me because I was like, can I use ChatGPT or something at work? I don't know if they'll let me. It turns out they all love like AI stuff and AI is great there. I felt kind of scared working beside people because I hadn't experienced that in many years now. I would only go to my old job a few times a week in person just to hang out with my friends, and I would mostly, work from home. So I wasn't used to having to sit and focus, and I'm pretty sure I have ADHD or something, so I'm like, it's hard for me to focus. So I felt kind of scared about that. And the commute is pretty long, but I still decided to go with this one because I thought it would be a challenge for me and also get to work with hardware and it's interesting. And I wanted to work at more of like a real startup. Like at this company, there's only 200 engineers. My team is like 30 people. So it's kind of like a startup within a startup. It's like the product line is 30 people. So that's why I chose this company over the other one because even though it's more well known, I felt like I would fit in more where I currently am. So I'm very happy with this decision and it was very hard to get here. But also, let me tell you a little bit about the tea of interviewing in San Francisco and all the weird startups there are. A bunch of recruiters would send me messages telling me about this like 10-person seed stage startup. All of them, literally, like, I'm not exaggerating. A bunch of them are like 2 or 3 guys who used to work together at some random company. Then they left to start this company, which is generally something with an AI wrapper. Then they decide to poach 3 or 4 of their other guy friends from that company to join them. And then they're like, maybe we should get some diversity in here. And then they reached out to me because I guess they want their first woman on the team or something. For some reason, all these recruiters or these startup CTOs are like, Maria, how about you do front end? And I'm like, huh? Me doing front end? I literally hate front end. Why do they think that woman equals front end? Like, I felt like they're just trying to hire me as a front-end engineer to pay me less and then make me do all the other work, data and all the back-end and that kind of thing. Because they're like, oh, Maria knows this stuff. Let's give her this work. That was weird. And all of them live in their offices in mattresses on the floor. But one of my friends wants to make a startup. So if one of my friends makes a good startup and gets funding, then maybe I'll join them and be one of those first few people. But right now, not into that. Also, I interviewed at a bunch of clean tech or like supposedly clean tech startup. Yeah, my rose colored glasses have faded for all of these like startups in San Francisco. A lot of them have just somehow weaseled their way into getting VC funding, and I don't know how or why anyone gave them money, because some of them, like this clean tech one I talked to, they were like, "Oh yeah, we're helping farmers be more sustainable by helping them with their accounting." And I was like, "Hey, can you give me examples of when you've helped someone be more sustainable? How does this software help them be more sustainable?" And they were like, well, we don't have any examples right now, but in theory, if the farmers do their accounting right, then they'll see, oh, here's where we can save money. And then they'll save money and instead spend it on more sustainable farming practices. And I was like, what world do you live in where people would actually do that? Basically, the company is just making accounting software for farmers, which did not sound very fun for me. So that's why I was like, no thanks. And this other company I interviewed at is basically being a middleman between the government and big corporations, because the government has this law that the big corporations have to tell them how many carbon emissions they're emitting every year. So in this company just formed to calculate that number for like Johnson and Johnson. And I'm like, okay, and now what are you doing? Like, are you actually helping the environment? I don't think so. Really sucks, because I care about the environment and I would like to work in that field. Tell me if you know of a clean tech startup that's actually doing something for the environment, and I'll research it. I also interviewed at every like .ai company, not OpenAI or Anthropic, because I was planning to do those, apply to those later on, but then I never ended up doing that. But every other .ai company that you can think of, I applied there and interviewed there. So a bunch of them are obviously AI wrappers, or the ones that say that they are cleaning data. I learned that apparently they only use machine learning and AI like 5% of the time, and the other 95% of the time they're just sending the data to be labeled in India by like actual human people, which was just like, what? Like, really? Seriously? That's what it is? That's all it is? Like all these like Harvard and MIT people who run these companies are just sending the data to India. Like, explain this. I also forgot to mention that I didn't take any referrals from my friends. They're all working in more like fancy FANG companies, and I didn't want to work there. Definitely, I do recommend getting referrals from your friends if you do want to work at those companies. But for me, it wasn't really useful. I mean, I could have used it for interview practice. I was more considering smaller startups or like Series C or D kind of startups is what my goal was. And now I'm at one of them, so I'm happy. Yeah, this was my interview story, and I hope you enjoyed all this crazy tea about interviewing. I hope that you get a job. I hope you watch my other video about all my actual advice and tips about interviewing. So I'll see you in that video. Bye!